Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our panel, People and Places Engaging Youth in Preservation Beyond the Classroom. This should be an interesting conversation about the importance of engaging youth, the next generation of preservationists, to advocate for our historic places. For those of you who aren't familiar with the LA Conservancy, and this may be your first time joining us, we are the nation's largest historic preservation, not local historic preservation nonprofit. We started in 1978 and we have nearly 5,000 members. And before I hand it over to Senna, our student and family programs manager, who's going to be moderating this panel, just a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature down at the bottom. I'll be watching those, and the panelists will have a chance to answer all of your questions. And feel free to interact with each other on the in the chat feature. But if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A. And so with that, I will pass it over to Senna.
Thank you, Eric. I'm very excited to be here today. We hope that these conversations will continue after this panel today and become a series of conversations about engaging students and youth in preservation. So welcome to our very first kickoff of these conversations. I wanted to start, before we pass it over to our panelists, to tell you a little bit about the student programs at the LA Conservancy. Drop in the chat how many of you are members of the LA Conservancy or have participated in any of our programs. Just let me know in the chat. Some of you may be new to our organization, some of you might be longtime members. I'm just curious, feel free to drop in the chat if you are familiar with us or are not. This is your first time attending a program with us. Let me know in the chat. So we have a variety of student programs that we currently offer, both in the virtual setting and the in-person setting, which we're hoping to launch in October. So stay tuned, which starts tomorrow, but officially will launch next week. Our on-site programs will resume before the pandemic, the programs that we were offering. We have workshops, we have student walking tours, we have on-demand resources, craft activities, and our most recent addition to our programs for students is our book list. And so all of that information you can find on our website, and I encourage you all to check out the link we'll drop in the chat that showcases all of the programs that we offer and will include upcoming programs next week. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about our panelists, and our panelists for today are three wonderful individuals that I've had the opportunity to work with on a variety of different projects, and they'll be talking about some of those programs today. We are joined by Vi Ha, who is a librarian responsible for the Octavia Lab, the award-winning DIY maker and audiovisual space for science, named after the science fiction legend Octavia E. Butler. And that lab is located at the Los Angeles Central Library in downtown. Vi works closely with other staff to make technology approachable and accessible by uplifting the community with the lab ethos of creativity within reach. Anna Soffer is a sixth grade science and Los Angeles history teacher at Thomas Starr King Middle School in Silver Lake. She has designed civically engaged projects and curriculum with the Friends of the Los Angeles River, LA Sanitation, and the LA Department of Water and Power. Art Licon has been teaching for the past 23 years in different schools across Los Angeles County. Currently, he is the lead teacher of a small learning community at Abraham Lincoln High School in Lincoln Heights that focuses on culture and social justice. So you've heard a little bit from me, you've heard a little bit about our panelists. We'd like to hear a bit more from you before we go into our panel conversation. So we have an icebreaker activity for you all, which we'll pull up in a moment. And we'd like to learn from you all, what inspired you to be here today? We're going to pull up an activity. We'll drop the link in the chat. To participate in this activity, you will click on that link and respond to the question. We'll wait one moment as we're pulling that up. All right. And we'll drop the link in the chat so that you all can participate. If you click that link on the chat and panelists, I invite you all to take part in this activity as well. You click that link on the chat and respond to this question. What inspired you to be here today? What inspired you to be here today? Maybe some of you are currently working with students in your neighborhood. Maybe some of you are teachers. Maybe some of you are interested in working more closely with youth. Perhaps you were pulled here today by a colleague or a friend, and that's okay too. All curiosities and responses are welcome. What inspired you to be here today? Connecting students to their communities. What other ideas do you all have today? Oh, wonderful. We got some promotion on Thomas Starr King Instagram. That's amazing. Thank you, Anna. I believe that might have been your efforts. Learning from others who work with youth in historic places, representing diverse communities. Retired teacher, welcome. Interested in local preservation. We're inspired to the work that Anna Soffer has done on behalf of the LA River and how it brings people together. Wonderful. How to energize kids to care about their own history. The president of the Art Deco Society of LA. That's amazing. We want to develop youth programs and get younger members. Colleagues curriculum for LA history and all of its conservation topics. This is fantastic. You all have similar but also different interests and what inspired you to be here today. As Eric mentioned, we hope that this is a conversation that you all take part in. We invite you to share your ideas and thoughts in the chat and specific questions that you all have throughout this conversation. Please include those in the Q&A, which we will be getting to at the end of our panel conversation. All right. So we're going to transition now. I'm going to invite each of our panelists to briefly share about the project and program that they're going to be speaking about today during our panel conversation. V, I invite you first to share a little bit about your work.
Will you be sharing my slides?
Or... Yes, we will be sharing that.
Excellent. Thank you. So my name is V and I run the Octavia Lab. We are a 3,000-foot makerspace that's available for free if you have a library card, a Los Angeles Public Library card. And with it, we have graphic design software, we have 3D printers, laser cutter, recording studio, audio, video, digitization equipment. And over the pandemic, as a response to community response and kind of a work of uplifting the community, we decided to take what library resource we had, such as Tessa, which is a big photo archive, or also ancestry.com, and then created stories and coloring pages that talk about, that represent our local history and through people and places. Next slide, please. So pretty much we put together with Sana, thank you so much for the LA Conservancy support, a coloring book called Hidden Heroes, Historic Places. And it's a well-researched, positive biographies, beautiful location descriptions about, and also wonderful activities to get people started about local history and local heroes in Los Angeles. And we find that people are very, very inspired about this approach. I'm currently in the process of developing this into becoming a teacher curriculum, kind of like a lesson plan of teaching young people how to make their own coloring pages of representing people that are important to them. So pretty much very excited to be on this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, V. And I do want to acknowledge V is tuning in from work today. So she is wearing her mask. She is being COVID safe at work. And I do also want to let you all know that because V is at work, she will be leaving at 5:30, but we will get to hear from her as much as we can before she leaves. So thank you, V, for taking that time out to share a little bit about your amazing work. Anna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Soffer. I'm a 6th grade teacher at Thomas Starr King in Silver Lake. And I've been this is my second year of the program, first year in person, doing a Los Angeles history elective with my 6th graders. So in my class, students look at historical events to really try and grapple with the differences between society's perception of LA and the reality of its past. And we really try and challenge that prevailing narrative that LA is a place that only existed as a result of westward expansion, and try and view our city as having been a center of diversity and globalism for years, for centuries. So students engage really critically with their city's history in order to understand why the city is the way it is today, and also goes into how race has played a huge role in the shaping of our city. Thanks to Senna and the LA Conservancy, as well as Bobby Green of the 1933 group, we've had a really great time doing this preservation project where students work on their writing skills and they contact civic leaders and developers and landowners to try and save some businesses and buildings that are on the Conservancy's urgent list. And it is anchored in the KCET docuseries Lost LA. So that's been a really wonderful resource. So thank you so much, Conservancy, for having me.
Thank you, Anna. I really wish I had this class in middle school. I would have totally signed up for it. So it's amazing the work that you're doing for these students. And lastly, we will hear from Art Licon.
Hi, everybody. So I teach Spanish and Chicano studies at Abraham Lincoln High School. I am the lead teacher of a small learning community on the campus that focuses on the social sciences, social justice, with a social justice theme. And we've been working in a Chicano studies class, looking at the history of the community and specifically the history of the school. Lincoln High School is one of the oldest high schools in Los Angeles. It's over 100 years old, and it has an extremely rich history with ties to the Black Panthers and the Brown Berets, Chicano power movement back in the 1960s. And the history just goes on and on. Every time I have the opportunity to talk about the school, I have to stop myself. Because I could just go on forever about our connections and the school's connections to the community. But of course, what teachers always try to do is make our classes real for our students. And especially when it's history, a lot of the times, students tend to see history as, something that's in the books and something that's about other people. And what my role as a teacher is to make students realize that, yes, history is in books, but history is not just about other people. History is about them. They are also part of history, and their decisions today and their lives today will be important in the future. And so it's a way of empowering our students to realize that, they're active agents of change in their community. And one way for them to see that is to understand the history of their school, the history of their community, and have them see that they can make a difference in their own lives and in their community. So what our students do is they study the history of our school, they do research, they do library research, and they interview elders in the community to understand what's happened at our school and what's happened in our community. And they develop their own walking tours of our school, where they create tours in groups, and they go building to building and location to location around the campus. And as you can see here in the slide in the bottom left, they take other students and they take community members on the tour of the school to share that knowledge that they acquire with the Lincoln High School community. We've been doing it for a couple of years, and it's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Art. I love when you said that you inspire students to be active agents in their communities. I think that's really important to think about, that their experience extends beyond the classroom. And that's what our panel is about today, to think about how that engagement with history goes beyond the work you do with students and youth within a classroom setting. So let's hear from our wonderful panelists, get all of their expert techniques and strategies. It's why you all are here today, and we're going to begin our questions. And so my first question is, each of you has taken a slightly different approach in connecting youth to historic places and local history. Can you explain the methodology behind your approach and why it's important to connect youth to historic places? Bea, I'd love to hear from you first.
I guess I should say I am a Lincoln High School alumni.
Oh yes, awesome. I love the connection, full circle.
I don't think you were my teacher. I think you're after me, but it is. So one of the reasons, so as a makerspace, we are focused on experiential learning so that you learn by doing, so you learn by making things. And the idea of us developing this coloring book and developing this kind of way of interacting with archives and with history is that we want, own voices. We want to have young people take technology and make their own representation of celebrating people that are important to them. So, I mean, we find very easily there are not very many books about Tongva in Los Angeles because it's not federally recognized. It's very difficult. And so it's one of those places where if a teenager or a young person learns the technology, can then make their own coloring pages. It's just kind of a point of inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. It's interesting that there's that intersection between technology, art, and history. I find that to be really fascinating, and personally, to be involved with the coloring book has been a really fun experience for me to be able to engage with those different topics as well. So it's amazing. Any other ideas?
With technology, I mean, pretty much what we've been developing now is trying to figure out ways to make it free. For me, it's like I'm currently working up curriculum on teaching photo editing software so that teachers can just, take this resources, this kind of technique, and just put it on, have their students be able to do it also.
Thank you, Bea. And we dropped the link in the chat if you'd like to learn more about the work at the Octavia Lab. You can check out the link. Art or Anna, any thoughts?
Sure. When I'm planning out my units, I really try and make sure that everything has a connection to real stories, social justice, art, and then sense making through recognizing patterns. So when you anchor the study of history with real stories and real people by looking at primary sources and analyzing photographs and artwork and listening to interviews and having guests come in, it makes it really relevant for the students. As Art was saying, I think a lot of times history is kind of seen as this thing that happened then. And so we live in this amazing, wonderful city. So why not use the place as an anchor for access for students? So like for social justice, especially in the younger grades, they get a taste of the injustices that marginalized groups have suffered in this country, but it's hard for them to imagine it. It's in books, and it's in this. We have Dr. King and Rosa Parks and, these heroes that are in our country's narrative. And that was then, and that was in the South, and race is really reduced to white and Black. So when I tell my middle school kids, Mexican people in Southern California were lynched at the same rate as Black folks in the South. And there's this artist named Ken Gonzalez-Day, and he takes old photos of Southern California lynchings and removes the victims from those photos. Like, let's hear from him and let's look at his work and analyze it and see what does that mean for you as an Angelino today. It's no longer a far away, long idea, and it becomes something really real that they can connect to. It's a real person in a living place. And a lot of times art, whether they're looking at it or creating it, is also a really great access point. So students make something called agamographs. They're like, if you look at it from one side, it's one thing. And if you look at it from the other side, it's another thing. We'll make two paintings, and we'll use art standards to teach them about value and about how you can convey tone with color, and then they'll tell a story. So I've done it for the California missions, and this year I'm planning on letting students pick a moment in history where one painting will be the prevailing narrative and one painting will be what actually happened. And they'll splice those together. And depending on the angle that you look at it, you get this different idea of what happened. And so that also is another great way for kiddos to really connect. And then the last thing I really love to do is to have students find patterns. So I think eminent domain is a really great example of that, and how folks have been pushed out of neighborhoods because of the use of eminent domain. And who does it tend to be? Who does it not tend to be? You know, when we look at the Chavez Ravine or Boyle Heights versus Beverly Hills, what's different? And then if we look at a map of redlining and compare that to a map of air pollution, or compare that to a map of people who own their homes, or compare that to property value, they start to make these connections for themselves, and they start to get angry. And I think that's a really good thing. You know, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention, is what I think a saying that I keep hearing. So those are kind of the tenets of what I think my approach is.
Touched upon two things that I'd like to highlight: relevancy and connection. I think what's really interesting about these two elements is that I would say that would be true for students and adults. You know, when you care about something, when it's relevant for you, then it's important, and you think about it differently. You think about preserving or advocating for this space differently. So that's really interesting, those two topics, relevancy and connection. And Art, would you like to add any ideas?
Sure, absolutely. Continuing the theme of relevancy and connection. So my students take Chicano studies with me, and we are at a school where Chicano studies, Chicano history took place. So we talk about the walkouts, also known as the East LA blowouts. But I think it's a great experience for the students because they read about the walkouts, and many students have seen, there's a very popular HBO movie about the event. And it's the largest student protest that took place up to that time. No student protest had ever been bigger, and it was done by high school students. And so it's a very important topic for the students, because a lot of the times, again, touching back into what I mentioned earlier, the students think history is something that was accomplished by great people, and they hear names like Cesar Chavez, and they hear names like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and they're impressed, which rightly so, right? But what we try to do in the class is realize that these were just people like you and me that, you know, saw something needed to be done, and took the initiative to step in and get involved and organize. And so we try to make history come alive as much as possible for them. By number one, the greatest resource is we're actually on the campus where the walkouts took place. So visiting the buildings. One great activity that we've done with support from the Conservancy is workshops where we look at old photographs, look at photographs of history taking place in our community, and realizing, hey, you know, this black and white picture that I'm seeing here, this crowd that I'm seeing, that's right here where, you know, I eat lunch every day. Or this incredible photograph of, you know, I see teachers and I see police and I see students. That's right in front of my school where I walk in and out every day. And I think a lot of the times, students and adults, we get stuck in our rut. Like, I have to get to class, the bell's ringing, I have my activities, you know, I've got a full day ahead of me, and we're walking right through history. We're walking right through our own roots and our own community without being aware of it. You know, we're just going through in our routine. So one great activity is the students look at pictures of the school. Then they actually go and they visit in groups. All of these locations are on the campus. And another, and I don't, maybe I'm giving a segue here to our a follow-up question, but a great resource are the members of our community. So our students meet and they interview people, alumni or other community members that were on our campus or in the community when these historic events took place. So the students get to see, yes, I'm looking at pictures, and wow, now I'm looking at the same building that was in this picture, but now we meet somebody that was actually there and find out what was the experience like for students 50 years ago. And so again, with the support of the Conservancy, we're able to set up these workshops, set up all of our guest speakers, and have students meet people who, in 1968, they were just students eating their PB&J sandwich also, until they saw there was a need in their community and they stepped up to make a change. And so that's what I want for my students. I want my students to see, again, like I mentioned earlier, that they can also make a difference in their own community. They can also get involved to improve their own lives. It's not something that just happens to you. Change is something that you got to roll up your sleeves and make it happen yourself.
That was a great segue to our next question. And one thing I want to point out before we move to our next question is that local history, starting local. If you're wanting to teach students and youth about history, start closer to where the students and youth are, and really think about the stories that are right there in front of them. And fortunate to be on a powerful campus where there's living history. So next question for you all, it's a perfect segue, is what resources have been helpful for you in designing these programs and projects? And V, I'm gonna invite you to share first, because I do know you have to leave in a few minutes, and then we'll hear from our other panelists.
I am so lucky to work in such a beautiful building called the Central Library, and this place, it has an amazing photo archive called tessa.lapl.org. We also have Calisphere, which is a kind of a statewide digital archive that's been very, very helpful. It's been an amazing way of showing people and teaching people how to interact with these databases and all these things to kind of just say, to borrow your question, to borrow some of our answers here, how do I make this big history question as local as I can possibly be? And it's like, for us, it's like putting this together and having people be inspired about it, and having other library systems also make a coloring book also. It's been kind of like, if I can show how radical it is that we have a public library with all these resources that's available for you for free, and all you need to do is just come in and it'll just change the world. That's it. Like, we are here to democratize and support everyone becoming, educated and engaged, and kind of be their best selves. Thank you.
Thank you, V. And I know you're going to head out in a moment, so thank you for joining us today. We did drop the link in the chat to the labs, Octavia Labs at the Los Angeles Public Library. So feel free to connect with her after the panel is done today. You can connect with her at the Octavia Lab. So thank you, V. Art and Anna, any resources for our audience to know about that are helpful in doing this work?
All right, I have to go off of what you said. Our community is absolutely our greatest resource. And just a little story, yesterday, we were studying Japanese internment, and we were watching a video about a man who runs a photo shop in San Gabriel Valley, whose father and grandfather were imprisoned at Manzanar. And the grandfather smuggled in supplies to build a camera. And so this man was showing his camera, and I had a student go, I think I know that guy. And then turns out that his family knows this man's family, and now he's going to come and talk to the community, talk to the school community. I had another student whose grandmother, or the neighbor's grandmother, is the woman who was being in the really famous photo of the woman being pulled out of her home during the Chavez Ravine eviction. He knew her too. Or like, my dad has a lowrider. Can he come in and teach people how to do a little painting, or my abuela's got a zoot suit, can I bring it in so we can look at it? That has been the most exciting thing for me, definitely. But if you're kind of new to LA history, I highly recommend checking out that docu-series Lost LA. It's a really great jumping off point to find what you're interested in, to do a little bit more of your own research.
I totally geek out on Lost LA. I highly recommend it in watching that. The episodes are available online or on KCT channel, whatever streaming channel you have that at your home. And Art, would you like to add any resources that have been helpful?
Well, I'll continue and finish up with the human resources that we were talking about. Of course, there's nothing like a first-person, first-hand account of people who were active in the community, people who were a part of events that happened. So definitely that is the best resource there is. We've set up a workshop where we'll have alumni come back and speak with the class, and we'll have somebody speak with the class who graduated from Lincoln High School in the 90s, somebody who graduated in the 80s, somebody who graduated in the 70s, and somebody who graduated in the 60s. And they'll do a presentation, with the whole class, and then break up into smaller groups and work with individual groups. And it's just such a great experience for the students. I mean, to see the students just, enthralled, just connected and focused on, somebody talking about, well, let me tell you about the walkouts because I was there, is different than, pressing play on a video. Also, I'm a little bit disappointed that I just missed V. She just checked out, but definitely our librarians are a tremendous resource, sticking with the theme of human resources. But I know many teachers, especially like some of our new teachers, and even this year, I've met some of our new teachers at Lincoln that think, their librarian is shelving books, and helping people navigate the Dewey Decimal System. And that's not the case. At Lincoln High School, and I think pretty much all LAUSD schools, we have teacher librarians, and the name, specifically says it all. They're teacher librarians. So we have excellent librarians, and at Lincoln High School, our librarian, Miss Lily Moyeri, has been wonderful, phenomenal, working with the students and teaching them how to access all of these archives, how to access databases, how to access TESA, teaching them the ins and outs of research. So I think that's a tremendous resource for all educators and anybody that wants to work with youth. I think a librarian, a teacher librarian, and an LAUSD teacher librarian is a tremendous ambassador. It's a wonderful way to get your students involved and connected to learning about the community and history.
And expanding on what you've just shared, Art, I wanted to acknowledge, that there are opportunities for those who might not be working on a school campus to still connect with these teacher librarians or librarians in your local community. They are a wonderful resource to be able to connect in different ways, and perhaps they can build connections with other members in the community as well. They seem to know everything about everyone, and I found them to be an excellent resource, and myself have connected directly with librarian at Lincoln High School, and has been really helpful. So it's a little strategy for you all to keep in mind. Now, with this great innovation and these great programs does come a bit of failure. We learn from these failures. We have these challenges that we might face in designing these new programs and projects. And so can you tell us about a challenge that you faced in doing this work and how you navigated those challenges and still were able to have an impact with youth?
Funnily enough, I think the city of Los Angeles has been my biggest challenge. I'm hoping that this year it will work out, but my students last year are really excited about the idea of making a public art project in Griffith Park. That would be a mural or a mosaic or of some sort that would reflect the history of Los Angeles from a bunch of different groups' perspectives. Because there's currently one in Griffith Park, a little mosaic that is quite whitewashed, and they were angry about that and they wanted to do something about it. And I have been trying every email address and being hit with red tape after red tape, but we're, perseverance and patience are the only two things that you can do. And also, relying on your kids. They're so passionate about it too. A strongly worded email from a 12-year-old is striking to anybody who gets it. So definitely using that to my advantage. And also, the class is not an official LAUSD course yet, but I just submitted the paperwork like a few days ago. So I'm hoping that once it's officially in the course catalog, we'll be able to keep trucking on.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, sometimes the community resources can be challenging to get a hold of or getting a contact with someone, but you shared one strategy in utilizing youth to start those conversations. And Art, I'm curious to hear from you if you have a different strategy or challenge that you'd like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the educational system and LAUSD as an institution provides these great opportunities for everything that we do. But also being a large institution, all of the requirements and all of the nooks and crannies of a large institution also create a lot of obstacles. All of the inner workings, the gears of the machine, so to speak, make the machine work, but also are its own obstacle. So we have all of the requirements of being, and this is an inside peek into the life of a teacher, right? We have our testing, we have our deadlines, we have our curriculum, we have all of these expectations from our school, from our administration, from our district, from the state, of everything that we're trying to get done in one semester. It's incredible how much teachers are trying to get done on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and in a semester. And when you're talking about history, really it has no limit. So I teach a one semester Chicano studies class. And, how much do I try to squeeze into one semester is incredible. And unfortunately, like a filmmaker, a lot of stuff ends up on the editing room floor. You have to make these tough decisions, what's going to get cut, what's not going to make the cut, right? So you have to adjust as an educator. In a one semester Chicano studies class, I've dealt with issues like in the past few years, especially after Coco, there's been a great increase in interest in Dia de los Muertos. And so you try to bring in as much of that into the classroom. Of course, being at Lincoln High School, you can't teach Chicano studies and not teach about the walkouts. So of course you want to try to include that into your class, and you try to include as much as possible, and you end up at a certain point like, how am I not going to talk about Cesar Chavez? How can I not talk about the United Farm Workers? We're in LA, how could we possibly not cover the LA moratorium? And if you're going to include the moratorium, can you cover everything? Can you do a lesson on Ruben Salazar? Can you cover everything relevant to the moratorium? So it's making those tough decisions of what to include, what to exclude in one semester. I find that to be the biggest challenge, is saying, I want to do these workshops with my students, and it's very important to learn about the history of the school and history of the community. But then also you need to make some tough decisions like what's not going to get covered, So I think that's a big obstacle, is trying to cover everything and trying to squeeze in everything, despite all of the other stuff that pops up on a daily basis, like, hey, we have a pep rally and, 10 kids have to leave the class early because they're cheerleaders, band members, football team. So they have the students have their own daily lives and their own hobbies. And, you're trying to tell them like, you're powerful beings and you can change your community. Yes, sir, but I have a pep rally in 5 minutes. So trying to squeeze in all of this information and bring all of these experiences to our students, but also our students have their own lives and their own stuff going on, and you need to be cognizant of that and try to schedule things in the right way. And as you know, Sana, we've tried to schedule many variety of activities and many things throughout the year, and it's always tough to find, things get moved around. And but I think that's the biggest obstacle for us, is just trying to squeeze everything in one semester. And also, you can't cram in everything and have a positive experience. There's pacing is very important, and allowing the students time to reflect, letting the information kind of marinate, so to speak, is very important. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Right. It's managing those expectations. Managing those expectations. You can set a goal and objective for the lesson plan or activity that you might have, but understanding you leave a degree of flexibility and adaptability, because when working with youth, there's always changes that may occur, especially if you might be a part of a larger institution such as LAUSD. So really interesting challenges that you might face whether you're at a school or not, and to consider these different ways to address them. And I'm curious in the chat, I didn't ask this earlier, but I'm curious in the chat, let me know if you are a LUSD teacher or a teacher at a different district. Drop that in the chat. Shout out to all the teachers who are joining us today after a long day of teaching, and everyone else who's been joining us well too after a long day of work. So be just curious if you're open to just drop in the chat. My last question for you both is, how do you measure success? So you have this great idea, you set this plan forth, you connect with different resources, utilize different resources, you work through challenges. But at the end of the day, you have different goals and objectives that you would like to meet. And so how do you measure success or assess the impact that you've made with the community, the students and the youth that you're working with?
I think as teachers, we're always reflecting and refining. And so at the end of every quarter, give the students a survey. And from there, you're always trying to make your program better. But I think personally, it's those little anecdotal moments where I know that I've been successful. Like when I have other teachers saying, oh, you got that kid in your elective, like he doesn't do anything in my class. And he's the star student in LA history because we're learning about his history, and all of a sudden that kid who's struggling in English or math can write a persuasive paper because they care about the building that they're trying to protect, because they know its history and they know its importance. So if a student leaves my class knowing that if they do their research and present their ideas in a thoughtful manner, people will listen, then I think I've done my job and I consider myself successful.
I was curious, Anna, if you don't mind sharing maybe one or two questions that you have in that survey. What are you asking the students to think about?
I'm asking them if they felt represented in the curriculum to make sure that in the future, if I missed anybody, that we can add that back in. I'm asking them about what worked for them, what parts were their favorites and what parts were not their favorites. And then I also, at the end of every lesson, I collect an exit ticket just to see if they've gotten what we're doing for the day. So I look through those too. And if it's clear that one of them wasn't affected, then I'll go back and I'll change it for the next time.
You hit on something that's really important, that the feedback goes both ways. The feedback that you receive from the students that you're working with, and also the feedback that you can give them. So that's really, really important to keep in mind. And Art.
Absolutely. I agree with Anna. The student feedback is, for me, the greatest measure of the success of our program and of our activities, which is challenging because every educator will tell you we are trained and we know how to look at data, and data is something that's, it's in all of our teaching careers, it's in all of our experiences as teachers, is looking at test scores, looking at feedback from test scores and testing, and numbers, and so this is an experience. This is not necessarily just numbers. This is not feedback that we're going to get in a multiple choice question. This is feedback that we're going to get in human experiences. When you take your students out and they do their presentations and they do their tours on our campus, and you see the crowd listening, you see the crowd of students engage and asking questions. And maybe sometimes in class you'll have the students with a blank look on their face, or somebody's daydreaming, or maybe they're kind of bored or their mind is somewhere else. But when they're doing their tours or when they're presenting their tours, you can see it in their faces. You can see it in their eyes that they're engaged and that they're enjoying and that they're learning. So sometimes it's a good old-fashioned type of feedback. It's human feedback. It's not necessarily some data that we look up on the My Data website. And I see my fellow educator chuckling there at the mention of My Data, because, right? I mean, how many professional development meetings, how many department meetings, how many faculty meetings, year after year are we looking at test scores, and we're looking at numbers.
For those who might be unfamiliar with My Data, can you tell us what that is?
So My Data is the tool that LAUSD teachers use to access, basically test scores. So what's one question that 70% of the students got wrong? Oh, well, we got to review that question. Or how did a certain student do in a certain concept? I mean, nobody knows more about testing than teachers do. And in my over 20 years in the classroom, it's been different tests, and we've learned how to interpret test scores from a variety of tests, standardized tests, writing assessments, etc. So we're pros at looking at numbers on a computer screen and looking at printouts with highlighters. We're pros, and here it's like you got to step away from there and say, oh, that's right. We're in the real world. It's not, just numbers on paper. These are human lives, and these are, it's the real world, basically. And so the feedback is the student experience, and it's something so basic. It's something so fundamental. It's something so human, people's emotions, and at a wedding, at an amusement park, at a sad event. And sometimes when we're at work as educators, we kind of get numb, I think, to, we're not talking about numbers and student ID numbers and test scores. We're talking about people and people's lives and people's experiences. And I think that's what's been wonderful about our partnership with the LA Conservancy, is that we're bringing education sometimes out of the classroom, and we're making it a real human experience. That sometimes the students miss, and sometimes we as teachers were guilty of kind of getting stuck in our bubble, because we're expected to. But my assessment of the success of our programs is human interaction, which I think is the best assessment, honestly. So I agree with Anna. It's a feedback from the students, whether it's the experience as they're presenting or listening, or whether through a survey. But when a student tells you, this is great. Oh, mister, I love this. Oh, I had no idea. That's 100 times more powerful than a piece of paper that says 97%. Likewise, when the students are daydreaming, or some random students. My students are in high school, so excuse my language, but when I have a student say, oh, this sucks, or what time is this class over? That's feedback. That's actual feedback. Like, sir, you're not making this interesting to me. I'm not engaged. I'm not connecting. So for me, the student experience is the ultimate assessment of our success or failure.
I appreciate you acknowledging that all feedback is helpful, regardless of it might be the feedback you want to hear or not. So that's really important to keep in mind. Now we'd love to hear from our attendees today who are here to learn more about engaging youth in preservation. We are going to transition to our Q&A. So if you already have not dropped a question in our Q&A, down below on your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. You can drop a question in there and we will be able to answer those questions. I do see a participant has her hand raised. So we'll go ahead and get started on our Q&A. And oh, wonderful. So inspired by these panelists who clearly care about and are passionate about their students and their learning experience. That's awesome. So that's our direct assessment as we're working through this panel, that feedback, that live feedback. Thank you, Jared, for sharing that. So I did see a hand raised. I don't see that anymore. Linda, did you have a question? I saw that your hand was raised. See if I can allow you to talk. There we go. Oh, I don't see that anymore. Any questions for us today? Well, we've done our job. We were able to address everyone's curiosities, but feel free to ask those questions as we move along. We have some time to be able to speak with you all. So one question we have here is, what inspired your interest in history? What inspired your interest in history? I open this up to you both.
I think when I realized that it was right under my nose, I became interested in it. It's once I was able to connect with my city, I think also really it was my connection with the Los Angeles River. I used to work with the Friends of the LA River, writing curriculum and doing tours and stuff. And I learned so much doing that, thinking like, I've lived in this city my entire life and I didn't know so much of this. Like, why didn't I know so much of this? What else is there to discover? I think that's what really piqued it.
Yes, and we had another question kind of related, Anna, if you can expand on the work that you did with the LA River.
I wrote a curriculum that was a project-based unit for third graders, along with my colleagues at FOLAR. So students, we took a walking field trip to the LA River. I was at a school that's now called Cal Creative. So we took a walking field trip. They kind of took photos and notes of what spaces are green, what spaces aren't, how might we make this better. They attended neighborhood council meetings. They made blueprints for how they might improve these really specific places. And then we had engineers come in from the DWP and LA SAN to give them real feedback on their blueprints, and their dreams were crushed, and they went back and they researched water-wise methods to improve those spaces further. And when they got the seal of approval from the engineers for their blueprints, it culminated in a presentation at Los Angeles City Hall in the Public Works Department. And so now that program has expanded it started with 2 schools, and I think now it's at like 12 schools or something like that.
Very cool.
Still going. I don't work at that school anymore, so I don't get to do it with my kids anymore. But yeah, that was really special for those kiddos.
Very cool. Thank you, Anna. Art, would you like to share what inspired your interest in history?
I think there's been a couple of times in my life when I've been inspired. One is the same exact experience as Anna, which is finding out like, wow, I can't believe, I'm surrounded by history. I'm walking over history without knowing it. So for example, coming to Lincoln High School, you know about the walkouts and you say, wow, that's an incredible event that took place here. And one of my very first years at Lincoln, I met one of our veteran teachers who told me about the tunnels at the school. And I was just blown away, like, excuse me, the what now? There are tunnels under the school. And
I've been under those tunnels. They're very cool.
and it's incredible, right? It's just incredible that there's a whole tunnel system under the school. At some parts, they look like tunnels because they're cement, right? They're paved. In some other parts that it's not cement, it's dirt. So it looks like some kind of incredible cave or dungeon, Dungeons and Dragons type of place where you're at. And finding out that a member of the Black Panthers was hiding under the school in those tunnels for months when he was wanted by the FBI because his mom was a custodian at the school. So she knew about the tunnels and she, let him in there, and he was literally hiding under our school for months from the FBI until he couldn't take it any longer. And I can understand that. I mean, it's damp and smelly, and it's a tunnel. It's what you expect from a tunnel. But exactly that, when you find out, like, wow, there's literally history underneath my feet, is a tremendous experience that makes you, want to get involved and want to learn more. Another experience for me, just as a high school student, having a wonderful teacher, which I think I'm kind of walking in their footsteps, because I had a wonderful Spanish teacher, and some of the best experiences that I had with this teacher were not language and grammar. They were about history and culture, and hearing him tell us about, history and culture was just a wonderful experience, an eye-opening experience, and sparked my interest, a lifelong interest in history.
All right, everyone. I want to be mindful of time. I do see we have a few other questions in the Q&A, and I encourage you all to reach out to our panelists if you have any specific questions. We hopefully can address those offline, and you can continue those conversations after today. But as we wrap up, I invite our panelists to share one key takeaway. If you can distill in a sentence, one key takeaway you have for our attendees who are interested in doing this work and engaging youth in preservation.
That's a tough one, Sana. Let's try it. Relevancy, real stories, social justice, and art will bring history alive.
Wonderful, thank you.
And I think a key takeaway from my experience is to just jump in when you have an interest. When you have curiosity, sometimes it's a little bit intimidating. Like, what am I going to do? I'm going to research the history of this community, or research. Yes, why not? There's, what's holding you back? If your interest is sparked from a documentary, from a website, even something as simple as an Instagram post, I've found myself in that place where, like, hey, look at this interesting Instagram post, and then go from there and take the path and go down the rabbit hole and see where it takes you. Don't be scared to take that very first step. You don't have to have a classroom full of students, a curriculum, a partnership with a great organization. You don't need, the whole setup. If you have a nephew and an interesting building near you, that's all it takes. Just that first step to start that conversation with the niece, nephew, granddaughter, grandson. Start that conversation, about whatever is in your community or whatever they're interested in. I think the key takeaway is, don't be intimidated. You don't have to have all of the answers. You don't have to know the whole history. When the child or in your life, or youth in your life, say, who's that guy in the statue? It's okay. And every great teacher will tell you, it's okay to say, I don't know, but let's find out. Let's look into it. I think a lot of times there's this pressure, like you've got to know everything, and you don't. You can teach your son, daughter, you can teach the young people in your life, how to research. I don't know. Let's find out. I don't have all the questions. I don't have all the answers, but I can find them out, and I'm going to teach you how to find the answers to your questions in life. So I would say that that's a takeaway is get involved.
Thank you. And on that note, I hope you all do get involved with youth in your communities, in your classrooms, in your neighborhoods. I want to thank Anna, our NV, for joining us today in this conversation on behalf of the Los Angeles Conservancy. We commend you for doing this wonderful work, and it's been such a pleasure to work with each of you personally on your projects, and we hope to continue working with you all on doing this great work. We've dropped a few different links in the chat for you all, links to our panelists, organizations, and schools. So please feel free to learn more and connect with them offline. And we encourage you all to continue attending our programs that are relating to students. You can sign up for our student program email list. So thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Good night.